give them a run. If I give them a run up. So how are you anyway? You well?
Yeah, mate, I'm not bad actually. Busy week. I managed to play golf on Wednesday. First time in a long while. I really enjoyed that.
Whereabouts was it?
Place called Hankley Common.
Is that down your neck of the woods?
Well, it's sort of Aldershot way. Yeah,
Okay.
a bit further down the A3 from me. I should turn my phone off, I assume. Hang on.
Yeah, no worries.
Don't want it buzzing away next to us, do we?
I got a funny feeling. I saw that because Thomas, my eldest, he's doing all that JPL Junior Premier League stuff, and they do it at centres around the country. And their centre, for my sins, their local centre is actually Southampton.
Okay.
And that's one of the ways we go down there quite a lot. I wonder
Yeah,
if
down the A3.
Mm.
Hankley Common's a beautiful golf course, mate. It's in the middle of 800 acres of heathland. It's one of the nicest golf courses I've ever played. Golf's not your game, is it? You never went.
It's not. No. I think it's a good walk spoiled. I think wasn't it Mark Twain said that.
Far too much finesse for your style, mate. I think that's what it is.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, my friend who does really like it, and he does all his golf tours and all that crap. He always laughs. He says it's not a fucking baseball bat, mate. It's not a fucking baseball bat. He says, I know that. I know that's what you prefer using.
The thing is, do I really enjoy the game of golf? Maybe, but do I enjoy outdoors, banter with mates, sociable afterwards? So it's as much about that. You can get 20,000 steps in a round, especially when you spend as much time looking for your ball as I do. It's funny because I've been playing golf for about 30 years, and up until quite recently, I'd always been able to fall back on the excuse that I was self-taught, never had a single lesson. But in 2018, I actually joined a golf club, and I invested a lot of time and money in golf lessons, and I didn't get any better. So I just have to accept now that it's actually a lack of talent rather than
do you know what? I do admire the sort of like the syncing up, the whole body. I was watching Thursday nights is the one night where I can sneak out and have a cheeky pint in my local, because there's nothing going on, taxi driving wise.
Yeah.
And there's it's run by a bunch of Saffers actually, so there's always sport on the TV as well, which is lovely. Yeah. And I was watching the golf ahead of the Man U Chelsea game, and
let's not go there.
Yeah, let's not touch on that, shall we? I have a very smug son this morning. But watching the golfers, just watching the whole sort of like the body motion, from the feet right through to the where the club swing ends, was like pretty phenomenal. It reminded me actually a lot of I was thinking of my karate teacher when I was watching them, because he was always saying, where'd you punch from? And all the white belts go, oh, it's from your fist, it's from your, and he's like, no, it's from your feet. You punch from your feet,
ground up.
Yeah, exactly. And you really see that with these boys.
But actually, like boxing and karate and everything else, or maybe not so much with karate, but one of the things I love about golf is there isn't a right way and a wrong way of doing it, because everybody's a different body shape, different heights, different lengths, different this, different that, different skill sets. Some people are more powerful, some people are more finesse. Yeah. So I just love that fact that even at that top level, the pros, yes, you've got to get some fundamentals right.
Yeah.
But there's more than one way of doing it,
Yeah. Yeah, it was cool. I can't remember what his name was. He looked Polynesian, actually, this guy who I was watching last night, and he was big and he was powerful and it was beautiful to watch. And then I scanned down and he was wearing a pair of Air Jordans. he was playing in basketball boots, and it was like,
a lot of the stuffiness has gone out of golf now. You still come across it every now and then. Like when I played on this Golf Society on Wednesday, what they wanted, it said on the invite, you must have a jacket for lunch afterwards for the food.
Yeah.
Of course, everybody came in their jackets. I don't even remember Wednesday. It was a sweltering hot day. So we all went into the locker room, showered, changed, came out wearing our jackets. As soon as we got into the bathroom, we took their jackets off, which you just think, really? In this day and age?
There's very few places who do that. I went shooting not so long ago, just up in West Wickham. Can't remember the name of the estate. Some dude giving it over to the National Trust and a shooting school. Same thing. It's like, jackets for lunch afterwards. You walk in and then he says, oh yeah, you can take your jackets off.
Great.
Brilliant.
I'm all for a bit of tradition and respecting tradition and what have you, but
it's got this time and place. Should we kick off officially?
Yeah.
So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Parentpreneur Show with me, your host, Michael Christian. I've got great pleasure today introducing Mr. David Whitmarsh. David, I've known for a very long time, and I've seen his journey from afar and admired it. And I have actually cherry-picked some of the nuggets I've used in my life from his. But without further ado, David, would you like to introduce yourself to the viewers?
Yeah, hi Mike. Thank you very much for having me on. Very excited to be here. Really good to catch up with you very recently. Yeah, I'm David Whitmarsh, and I'm the Chief Executive of a very exciting renewable energy business called Standard Gas Technologies.
Fantastic. Now, the great thing is, as I said, now I've sort of come across you in a number of iterations. Should we give a bit of background? Because obviously it's the Parentpreneur Show, so it's all about entrepreneurship, and you have that in bucket loads. But you also, because of your background way back when, have one of my favorite qualities, which is resilience. So maybe sort of go back a little bit further in time, and we'll start there.
So yeah, my initial profession was in commercial property. Bizarrely, I followed into that because classically got to sort of the age of 17, 18, people saying to me, what was I going to do for a living? And I had always thought I was going to join the army when I left school, which we'll come on to, I'm sure. But I didn't. And I was looking around thinking, okay, what am I going to do now? And there was another friend of mine at school whose dad was a chartered surveyor. And I always thought, well, you know what, they've always got nice things and they go on nice holidays. I'll be a chartered surveyor. And that's literally how I got into commercial property, for no other reason than that. I'm not sure I really knew what I was going into. But that was in the mid-80s, and graduated in having done land management, and came out and worked for one of the London partnerships, a partnership called Gooch and Wagstaff, which I loved, actually. It was a great company full of great people. And was very happy up there up until probably the early 90s. And then if we cast our minds back, it became quite a turbulent time. The ERM, Norman Lamont and his antics that ended up with 15% interest rates. And anyway, the property market crashed, really.
Yeah.
And I felt like my career had stalled and it was going nowhere. So I made a rather radical decision to go off and join the parachute regiment, which I did, and thoroughly enjoyed. Although I always knew it was a foray into some adventure rather than a career shift. And actually, I have to respect one of my bosses at the time, who, when I went in to tell him my plans, he said, well, is this a permanent thing, or is it, you know, just something you want to get out of your system? And I said, well, it's the latter. And he said, okay, well, don't resign. Let's call it a sabbatical. You go and do what you've got to do, and when you're ready, come back. And that was fantastic, because it really gave me the confidence to go out and just accept that this was a period of my life and make the most of it, which I did. Interestingly, when I came back and saw that same boss, he welcomed me back into the investment team at Gooch and Wagstaff, which of course is where I met the two guys who became a very big part of my life, James Young and David Holt, who you know.
Yeah.
And I think it was coming back into a big partnership, a big kind of corporate, if you like, that made me think, do you know what? I think that I'm not best suited to this environment. I wasn't very political in the office. You know, I find it hard not to speak my mind. And encouraged by another client who I'm still very close to, and I'll always be grateful for him for giving me this kind of kick in the pants. He said, well, you should set up your own business. And I spoke to Jimmy and Holty about that, and we took the ridiculous step of just saying, yeah, let's do it. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think that one of my experiences of entrepreneurship ever since has been, if you really sat down and thought through what you were going to do, you'd probably never do it. There's got to be some element of a leap of faith where you just step across the gain line. You know, and I've got that analogy from jumping out of an aircraft. You know, you've got to just you've got to go. You've got to. And we did. We set up our own business in 1999, ironically on April the 1st, which we thought was quite funny. And we had a fabulous time. You know, I used to get up and come to work and spend the day with two of my best friends. We worked hard, we played hard. You know, it was a boom time in the property world. But I think that was my first kind of step into entrepreneurship without even realizing I was an entrepreneur, you know, i.e. somebody running your own company, taking risks, making decisions, making choices around the direction that the company goes in. And I spent 15 years with that, in that setup with James and David, Jimmy and Holty, as they're affectionately known. And but then we kind of moved into the phase of the banking crisis, the credit crisis of sort of 2008, 2009. And that period, I don't know if you remember, lasted about 3 or 4 years in the property sector. And it was an interesting time because financially we made money because it played into our hands. It became a lot more entrepreneurial. You needed to sniff deals out. You needed to make deals happen.
Yeah,
really suited us. So bizarrely, during that period, we actually were financially very successful. We did some of our best deals from a monetary term in that period. But coming out of that period, I think that I had felt that there was a sea change in the markets, in the property sector. A lot of companies were getting bought up. Smaller companies were amalgamating, but creating these bigger super companies, the DTZs, the JLLs, and what have you. And as I said before, that I just knew that wasn't my environment. And I think that's when the opportunity of getting involved in Standard Gas, which is a whole another question for you, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But you know, that's when that opportunity came across. I felt ready to do something quite radical and step away from an incredibly successful business with people that I loved, and making that step change across to something that, relatively speaking, I knew very little about. And I think that feeds back again to what I was saying, that sometimes that's not a bad thing. Sometimes ignorance is bliss. You know, if I knew in 2013 what I was getting myself into, I might never have done it. But that's probably where the qualities of resilience and what have you come out. You know,
it's very interesting. You're spot on, because there's two sort of themes there. One is if you knew everything, you probably wouldn't do it. You know, one of the little phrases I always bandy around with my kids and also with clients and stuff is ready, fire, aim. You know, you just do it. And to go back to the sort of jumping out of an aeroplane thing, you know, it's jump out and, you know, build the parachute on the way down. And I think that has to be a massive part of being entrepreneurial. But what really kind of resonated there was when you said that I wasn't political. So when we had coffee the other day, I said, oh, look, you know, that's where I used to work. And I used to work for a sort of a small family office type thing. And I just couldn't be asked with the politics. I just couldn't be asked.
It's speak our mind. I think it's a great thing, but I've never been that good at saying what I think people want me to say. I'm more inclined to say what I think and, you know, worry about the consequences afterwards. It's got me into trouble over the years. You know, particularly when I've been beholden to other people, it can get you into hot water. But, you know, I think there's two other things that I would add, which I think are relevant to what we're going to talk about here today. Both of which kind of came from my experience in the military, which actually, if you think about it, is a very structured organization. Within the parachute regiment, because of the style in which they train and the way they're trained to fight, they have something called Airborne Initiative, ABI, because it's quite typical when an airborne unit deploys through injury or through action, they can very quickly be decimated down to, you know, lose a lot of their senior officers, a lot of the senior NCOs. So they create this environment, this mindset, which they call ABI, Airborne Initiative, where whoever's there, they get together, they work it out, and they work together to achieve the mission, to achieve the aim, to get to the target and to do the job. And that, I think, is relevant into entrepreneurship, because you just have to make do with what you've got. The other thing I learned in the military is there's a saying, very famous saying, no plan survives first contact with the enemy. It's a bit like Mike Tyson's, everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the face.
Yeah.
You know, you have to have a plan, of course you do. But the important part of a plan is the objective. What is it you're trying to get to, and not be too fixed on A to B to C to D, because you can be sure that, you know, your best laid plans are going to be tossed out the window within a very short period of time. It's how you react to those setbacks, I think, that define you as an entrepreneur.
I think you're spot on. I think one of the things I've noticed, and again, something I drill into people, is that it's having a framework and having a discipline to work to a framework. But within that, that's where you have the flexibility.
Yeah,
because I write a list, you know, before I go to bed every day, and it's never more than 6 things. And I've got a rough idea where they're all going to slot into the day. That means that, you know, when people see me in my local coffee shop pretty much every day, they go, "Oh my God, I'd love to have your life." I said, "Yeah, would you? Would you? Yeah, really." You're missing the fact that, you know, you've been up until 10 or 11 just getting stuff done, so you can actually have that flexibility. It's another quote, I think, which was attributed to you, which I dug out, and I think this is relevant to what you've just said there about the about serving in the paratroops, and also with entrepreneurism is unless you're prepared to do something different, you're never going to break new ground.
Yes, absolutely.
That is something you said, isn't it?
I did say that, and I mean it. I think that you know, if you want to change something, you have to do it differently. You can change things from within, so I suppose there is a context. But if you want to make rapid change, I think if you want to make marked change quickly, you have to, by definition, do things differently. And it's actually been one of the challenges that I've had at running Standard Gas, because we're coming into a sector which basically involves waste and energy, and those are 2 infrastructure sectors that have to deliver. You know, the world that we live in relies very much on the fact that every day somebody comes and collects your waste, takes it away, and you don't see its end route to disposal. And every morning you want to get up and put your kettle on, switch your light on, and there be power there. So those 2 sectors are risk averse and change averse. They like to do things the way they've always done it because it works. So if you're going to come into a sector, both of those sectors, and try and shake them up, you have to be bold, and you have to try and convince people to do things differently. I've learned some things along the way with that as well, that sometimes trying to change things head on, like a bull in a china shop, which again is very much a sort of an airborne attitude of, you know, bags of smoke straight down the middle.
Yeah,
that's not the only route. You can make change quickly but not just taking people on, but trying to bring people on, rather. If trying to bring people on board, I think that's often a better way. But I do believe to make a difference, you have to change things.
Would you say that being an entrepreneur or being the father of daughters has made you better at those soft skills?
Well, definitely being a father of daughter has softened me. So you'll have read in that same interview where I said that about change. I also said that I've been referred to as reckless in my life in the past. I've made so you know, like I just said, going from a professional chartered surveyor business into the parachute regiment, going from a well-established company to set up my own, or to go into a completely new sector. Those decisions to some people appear to be reckless, but I'd always had this attitude, well, but I'll back myself, I'll always be okay. And having kids, and for me particularly, I think having daughters, has changed my outlook on risk, you know, because it's not just I'll be okay, I've got to make sure that they're going to be okay as well. Yeah, having daughters, playing dolls, pushing prams around the garden, they're going to soften anyone over time, I think.
If you'd seen me about an hour ago, I was wearing necklaces just before school.
I've had that horrible thing in the morning, on a Monday morning sometimes, where I've been sitting having my morning coffee and I realise I've still got nail varnish on from where I've let the girls make me up and scrubbing away trying to get the nail on.
Oh, you're
But
so
actually now, I don't care anymore. I've got to a point where I'd actually wear the nail varnish with pride now. It's a mark of of the privilege of being a father.
I think that spot on. I was just about to say, for me, yes, I've softened my approach to risk. The analogy I used recently with someone was I always used to go out like Kevin Peterson, and it was like smashing for the boundaries.
6 or out.
6 or out. Yeah. Death or glory.
Yeah.
But I've realized over recent years it's far more prudent to play like Boycott or Alistair Cook, and chip away for the singles. And
it's interesting that because I'm sure this is typical. I'm sure a lot of entrepreneurs will relate to this. And it's certainly been my experience of what we've done at Standard Gas. I've made huge sacrifices to get the company to where it is, and inevitably that affects my family, right? So when we first took control of Standard Gas in 2016, I became an investor in Standard Gas in 2013, and my current chairman and I took, if you like, control of the company in 2016 when I became the chief exec and he became the chairman. And for 4 years after that, we worked for nothing. Thankfully, we both had, over my years working with Jimmy and Holty, we built up a portfolio of our own that provided me with a passive income that so I could do that. But I think that's probably quite a common sacrifice that most entrepreneurs make when you're setting up a company. We had to make sure that the team got paid. Everybody, people who had a job at Standard Gas as such, they always got paid. But the executive team, who were in fact a group of the shareholders who stepped up to offer to run the company when it looked at one point that it was going to fail. I cannot underestimate the impact that that's had on my family. And let's put it into perspective, they've not had any hardship, but whether we're just talking about parents, kids, but also my wider family, my wife as well. We've not been able to do some of the things that we might otherwise have done. And it sounds like first world problems, doesn't it? But I think it's a mark of the commitment that you have to make as an entrepreneur when you're also a family man. I think that it's because, as you well know, Standard Gas is more often than not the last thing I think about when I go to sleep and the first thing I think about in the morning. And I've been, I don't think in the last 6 years I've had a holiday where I haven't worked every single day.
Yeah.
Not all day, but taken calls or particularly with this kind of format now.
Yeah.
And the challenge for someone like me is that and I'm sure for a lot of entrepreneurs, I can't just switch from one personality to the other. So I can't just go from being, the CEO of Standard Gas and then literally the next minute jump in the pool and be dad to my 2 girls, because I'm there, but I'm not there sometimes, if that makes sense.
It's a tricky one, isn't it? And I think you have to accept that there will be times where one or the other, consumes you entirely. But when you know what your end goal is, when you have clear values, when you have a very strong why for what you're doing, you it kind of appeases that sense of guilt, or not guilt, or sense of I should be doing something else. It's the old adage, when you're in the office, be in the office. When you're with your family, be with your family. But that doesn't always work when you are like the CEO or when it's your own gig. You do have to sort of juggle the two things, and it's a dynamic equilibrium.
And I have to give credit to my chairman, who is an extraordinarily experienced and very wise individual, having reached the ripe old age of 79, but puts people 30 years his junior to shame with his energy levels and his commitments. He's extraordinary. And when we first took on Standard Gas, as I say, back in 2016, and it really was consuming then, because we literally had to pick up the pieces and go again. And he said to me, do not forget about your children. Do not forget about your family. It is important. Otherwise, what's the point? Yeah. You'll be thinking you're doing this for them. Don't kid yourself. And he said, make sure every day when you come home, even if it's for 20 minutes, half an hour, phone away, you know, be there, be present. So he's always been very supportive of that, and I've taken that on board. You know, we are only borrowing them, you know. And you know, it's interesting because a mistake I've made in the past is whenever I'm kind of mapping out my ambition or my vision for what I want for Standard Gas, when I'm projecting forward 5 years or 10 years, the mistake I used to make is, in my mind, everybody in my life and my family is the same age. So I'm thinking, oh, in 5 years' time, in 5 years' time. And of course, well, my eldest daughter's 13. In 5 years' time, she's off to university. So, you know, I don't want to be planning for what we're going to do in 5 years' time, and then in 5 years' time look around and, oh my God, they've gone. You know, how did that happen?
I had never even thought of that. That is so right. I'm a big one for planning, you know, 1 year, 1 week, whatever, but I've never taken into context the age. You're right as well to say that I'm doing everything I'm doing for my kids. I want to build on the legacy that my folks gave to me. You know, for me, paying it forward would be to take what they've given me and then sort of magnify it 5, 10x, whatever I can do. And that's easy for me to understand as a 50-year-old dad, but for my kids, they don't give a shit. No, they want to have that 10-15 minutes of just unadulterated stupidity at the end of the day with you. That's it.
You know, we talked about it when we met for that coffee, Mike, and you know, the realization that I've had is that, you know, we've had moments in our lives where we've taken our kids off on fancy holidays abroad or here in the UK, where we've stayed at 5-star hotels, and that's as much for me and my wife as a little bit of a luxury for us and everything else. But you're not doing it for your kids because they don't get it. And actually, the holidays that my kids will talk about are, you know, long weekends in my sister's caravan up on the Norfolk coast, or you know, last year we had a week down in Cornwall that we booked last minute, and the weather was fabulous, like it has been recently, and we had an absolute ball. So the most valuable thing you can give your kids is your time
and attention. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, getting back to the sort of the big view though, and this kind of segues back to Standard Gas as well, because you could argue that you're here involved with a company that produces carbon negative energy from waste stock. So we'll come on to that in a moment. But the very fact that you're in this sort of environmentally empathetic industry does say that it's not all about the money for you, that you are looking at building something other than just a business, and that has to do with having kids, I guess.
It's certainly connected. There's no doubt about that. You know, in all of the time I built a successful business in the commercial property sector, no one ever said to me, "Wow, commercial property, that sounds interesting. Tell me about it." And whereas with this business that we're working on at the moment, there is definitely, and that this applies to everyone, I think, within the company, but also widely from my experience with people in the sector, that they are in it because they do care about the environment, about the climate, about the future. And, you know, I have had conversations with mates of ours, people who you know as well, who are in very senior positions now in banks or in investment companies, you know, the big UK insurance companies and what have you, all of who invest in infrastructure, trying to get them to get behind Standard Gas financially and saying, but you've got kids, you have, this isn't a decision that you can just walk away from. We have to think about the future. And there is, without a shadow of a doubt, a feeling for, I mean, first of all, it's got to be commercially successful, and it's got to be commercially successful to be rolled out. You know, you know, if it's not commercially viable, it isn't going to work. That's just the way the world is, you know. So we've got to make it commercially viable first. But you know, I've said this before, as much as our generation and older might think that the climate change, climate crisis issue is still a controversial one, and I understand that. You know, there's you could do a whole session here on just that one point. Let me assure you, and I'm sure you know this, our younger generations, it is not open to debate. They are 100% convinced, and look at some of the crazy things that have been happening weather-wise and climately. Now, whether that's man-made or not, we could debate that till the cows come home. Our kids have accepted that this is something we have to do about. And if anything, that's part of what gives me hope that there is a chance, you know. I'll tell
No,
you the other thing I was going to say as well. I've never worked in a sector that is as open to collaboration, support, connecting than I have in this sector. You know, commercial property, yes, you needed to have relationships with people on both sides of any deal to make that deal happen. And being the ability to strike those relationships was important. But you never really saw companies. You saw individuals create those sort of collaborative relationships, but you never really saw companies do it. They were very much in competition with each other. Here, it's completely different. There is a real sense of collaboration and cooperation.
yeah, it's a good point. I remember from my forays within the property world, commercial and otherwise, you'd shake hands on a deal, but then you go away and count your fingers.
Yeah, it was dog eat dog, mate. It was survival of the fittest. Whereas this genuinely, I think the whole carbon removal, net zero movement has garnered people. It's pulled them together. I think of course, there's still a bit of greenwashing going on here and there. And I got asked the question of saying, you know, when a lot of these big companies have got their net zero ambitions now, are they doing it because they care about the climate, or are they doing it because they think it makes them look better and they might sell more of their things? I said, well, for the time being, does it matter? You know, as long as we're getting where we need to get to, whatever the motivations are, let's work with them. We work with those motivations, and over time, I think we'll see as the younger, and even by younger, I mean people in their 30s, you know, people in their early 30s, late 20s, people who are already in the corporate world. I think they really do care.
Well, you made the point recently as well that this does now become commercially sensitive. If you are not green, not just greenwashing, but if you are not green, people will actually make a commercial choice as a consumer to not take your product or service.
I think people will make an informed choice going forward. And I think that's why a lot of the big corporates have jumped on to this issue. I think consumers will make an informed choice. And if one product is having a less harmful impact, or is in supporting climate issues, I think people will make the choice to buy that product over another. I think we're already seeing that.
Yeah, and I think this is also where the collaboration comes in, because collaboration requires long-term trust, long-term relationships, and long-term plans. It's why you're not seeing it from perhaps some older industries like banking, insurance, or politics for that matter. All of whom are in it for the, you know, wham bam, thank you, ma'am, let's get what we can now.
But if you look at the newer industries, where the younger people tend to be in tech and what have you, there's a lot more enthusiasm and commitment to the topics we're talking about.
No, absolutely. So how do you sort of involve, if at all, your children, your daughters in your world? Do they know that daddy's an entrepreneur? Do they know daddy's a CEO of a business and all that sort of stuff?
No, so my kids are 13 and 7. So my 7-year-old, bless her, is still wonderfully innocent and naive to anything that she knows. They know what I do, actually, to be fair. That's being a bit hard on her. She knows what I do. She understands the principles of what I'm doing, and they understand that I'm the CEO of that company. My eldest has been on it for a long while, and actually it's part of one of the initiatives that we've taken within Standard Gas is we've set up a sister company called the Carbon Char Store, and it's the Carbon Char Store that's going to focus very much on the carbon removal element of our business. So you've got the main core of the business, which is where we very cleverly and very innovatively take residual waste, so waste that's currently going to landfill or incineration, so it's either being buried or burnt, and that's very harmful to the environment, regardless of what they might tell you about how they're trying to abate those emissions. They're still very harmful to the environment. We've developed a much cleaner way of converting waste through into something that once again has value. So waste by definition has no value because you're going to throw it away or get rid of it, and we're turning it back into 2 products. One, a very, very clean gas that can be used to replace natural gas, and this carbon char. And the carbon char is the piece that makes us net zero, or actually carbon negative. So in our process, it's a modern mechanical industrial process. Of course, yes, we emit CO2 into the atmosphere. It's impossible not to do so if you have a modern, even wind and solar have a very low carbon footprint. However, because of this carbon char that we're creating, and provided that we sequester that, which means to kind of bind it up, lock it away into something, and we're doing studies at the moment on sequestering it into concrete to make concrete cleaner, we are removing more carbon than we're actually emitting. So we are a net zero or net negative from a carbon perspective. And I think that's really the key issue of what we're doing so differently. Now, setting up the carbon charge store, the idea around that was to try and take the more perhaps consumer facing side of our business and allow people to understand what it is that we're doing. And I think that families, individuals will start to take responsibility for their own carbon footprint. I think we're already seeing it now. We touched on it. You'd rather buy one product that has a lower carbon footprint than another. But that sort of inspiration did come in part from my eldest daughter, because she said to me, well, it's a bit like, so years ago, they got very much into conservation. And through the World Wildlife Fund, I very typically, like a lot of other dads, I'm sure, we subscribe once a month to the World Wildlife Fund, and we sponsor a snow leopard, a tiger, and an elephant. And whilst I'm sure we don't actually individually sponsor that, you know, the concept is there that they're buying it. They're buying into the idea that there is scarcity and that it's not a finite supply of animals and the balance of nature. And it was Grace who said to me, my eldest, who said, look, we should do the same with carbon, Daddy, in the same way that we are contributing to save nature and wildlife. We could do the same with the planet by supporting the removal of carbon. So the idea around the carbon charge store is that somebody can go on, calculate what their family's carbon footprint is a year, and subscribe to with us. So for every ton of carbon that we remove, they say, well, we'll buy that ton of carbon removal from you, and we'll do it through your carbon charge store. So we're setting up an app that people will have access to. They'll be able to calculate their own carbon footprint. They'll be able to say, okay, our carbon footprint is 2 tons a year, or whatever it ends up being. And they can commit through a subscription, same as I do for the snow leopard, the tiger, and the elephant, to clean up their own personal carbon. And I think that there is a real scope for that. Now, that came from a conversation with my eldest daughter.
See, that is fantastic, isn't it?
Yeah.
From the mouths of babes, isn't it? And it is actually, that goes back to what you said earlier about, if you actually knew all the facts, you probably wouldn't get involved in being an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
Or if you were like fully qualified up, you'd be like, oh well, yes, but you come in with a completely fresh perspective and bang. I think that's a fascinating idea, and definitely we'll stick something in the show notes for anyone listening or watching who wants to find out more about that. So, I mean, I can imagine the demographic who are, you know, tuning into the Parentpreneur Show. It's very much resonating with them.
Yeah, you know, we've done it through the carbon charge store. We did a deal recently with a sports engagement, sports management team called Limelight Sports. So Limelight Sports organize and run mass participation sporting events, so marathons, triathlons, duathlons, all these kind of events that around the country. And they did a survey of all of their participants to say, you know, what could we do better? And the most overwhelming feedback they came was, look, we're really concerned about the effect that mass participation sports are having on the environment. So, you know, you've seen all of the plastic bottles and all of this, loads of people traveling from around the country specifically to participate. So the carbon footprint, relatively speaking, is quite high. And you have generally in people who get involved in mass participation sports, people who are health conscious, environmentally aware, and what have you. So I know the CEO of Limelight, he came to me and said, that carbon thing you're doing, is there any way we could tie these two things together? And it was a brilliant idea, and I credit entirely to him. And we've struck a deal with Limelight Sports now, where anybody participating in their event, we will gift to them their carbon footprint for participation in that sport. So their participation in that event becomes completely carbon neutral. And I think that's, you know, it's a relatively small, I think it's about 400 tons a year. So it's a relatively easy thing for us to gift. Yeah. It's the kind of thing we want to do. And it's finding that balance between making something, like we said before, commercially viable, but having that social climate impact that we want it to have as well. it's led us to some thinking around a foundation that we want to set up within Standard Gas. And we haven't quite got to the bottom of it yet, but the basic bones of the idea is that take ocean plastic. They now believe that 80% of the plastic that ends up in the ocean comes from 10 locations in the world, and they all tend to be in the Far East and Africa, where they are pretty relaxed about how they dispose of waste. In fact, actually, the Western world needs to hang its head in shame, because we've been shipping our waste out there as well. And, you know, out of sight, out of mind, they're going to deal with it. And of course they don't. They take out what's got value, and the rest of it they throw into rivers, which ends up washing down into the ocean. Our idea is that we will, you know, I don't know what it is, but every 10th machine that we make of ours, we will gift it on a non-profit basis to one of these locations. We're working with a group called the Plastic Bank, who are trying to do their own initiatives to get people to use more, recover more plastic. And that we'll put these machines in those locations. So rather than throwing their waste in the river, they bring it to us, and we'll give them something in return for that.
I think when we discussed these over coffee recently, I thought these ideas, both the Char Bank and also this the foundation, absolutely fantastic. Yeah. And I think I mentioned then as well, what I've discovered recently, and what you've just given an example of, is the more people you can help, the more successful you will be.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be a straight a commercial transaction initially. The good will flow, and the money will flow from that as well.
I agree. Completely agree. And again, I think it's an exciting thing about the sector that I'm in now, that you can do that. So the success of our company isn't measured solely on the money that we create. I think there's the impact side of it as well. We are seeing more and more sustainable impact funds. You know, we've seen controversy in the press recently, where big financial institutions, big investment institutions, making positive decisions not to invest in businesses that, okay, not necessarily just saying not investing in the ones that are harmful to the environment, but not investing in those companies that aren't looking at ways of changing or improving or lowering their impact. We call those the hard to abate industries. So industries that we need for modern life, but they're very hard. They have a very high and very stubborn carbon footprint. But you know, I think that the world is changing. I think the attitude towards forcing change and encouraging change is what we need to see.
That's fantastic. We're sort of coming towards the end of the show now, but
quick.
It has actually flown by. I just like, but one of the things I said at the top of the show was in the introduction, is that you've kind of given me inspiration. I actually came to you, I can't remember what it was a number of years ago, and asked for a bit of a nugget of advice, and you very kindly gave me something which I've used ever since, which was, because I was in a very much transactional brokerage sort of situation when I asked this, you know, and you were only as good as your last deal. You got a fee, and that's it. You're scrabbling around looking for your next deal. And you very, very wisely and kindly said to me, take a piece of the action, you know, take some instant gratification because you need to pay the bills and put food on the table, but leave some of your fee as equity in the
long game. Yeah,
exactly. And I've used that consistently ever since, and it's really kind of, you know, paid off for me. So thank you for that. And it touched upon what you said when you had 4 years where you and the chairman weren't paying yourselves. Multiple streams of business income are really, really crucial, I think, for an entrepreneur. What other nuggets or pieces of wisdom have you had given to you?
Sleep on it. That's a classic. that's a cracker, because I have relied the energy that I felt in the past that I brought to businesses that I've run have almost been born from a negative perspective, like a drive against injustices that I've personally felt. No, I'm going to prove you wrong. Or, you know, I always used to say the easiest way to get me to do something is to tell me that I can't do it, stand back and watch. But my chairman is as wise and as experienced as they come. And one of the best things he says, we've got a dilemma in front of us. He says, let's sleep on it. And he's right. There's something about taking yourself out of the moment, taking the emotion out of it, taking the injustice, the rage, or even the overexcitement. You know, it can be a positive thing as well. You know, you can make wrong decisions because you're overly optimistic. And that view of, you know, let's sleep on it, take a couple of days. And 9 times out of 10, you find that when you actually switch the conscious thinking process off, it's still whirring away in the subconscious, you know, and you wake up some mornings or even in the middle of the night and think, it's obvious, and you know what to do, and you can't bang. You have some of the best ideas I've ever had is when I was training for triathlons. I'd go for these long, boring swims at the Lansdowne Club in Berkeley Square, up and down, up and down, up and down. But halfway through, I'd have this thought. And it's almost like, you know, you're clearing out the noise, and what's left, it comes through as a pearl of an idea. I think that that one particularly resonates with me. But I think, you know, I know you and I are both fans of Simon Sinek, and you quoted him earlier about finding your why and what have you. You know, I think one of his other theories, if you want to call it that, one of his other ideas is, if you want to be successful in business, you have to play the infinite game. You know, you can't focus on, and I think that's one of the things I grew frustrated about with the business that I was running before with Jimmy and Holty, particularly on the transactional side of that business. You were only as good as your last deal. We were never building anything, you know. We would work hard for a year, and at the end of that financial year, we'd work out what the profit was, we'd divide it up, then we'd go back to zero, and we'd go again, you know. And one of the things I do love about this business when working in now is that we're building something that I'm hoping is going to be around for a very long time, playing that long game, making decisions that are the right decisions, not just in the moment, but for the future. I think that's something that I've really enjoyed learning more about.
That really long tail that just wags and wags and wags.
But I think you're right as well. I mean, there's a lot of talk on this on social media now, isn't it? It's very current about passive incomes. And if you, as an entrepreneur, if you can create passive income, if you can create business ideas that make you money when you're not sat at a desk, or even when you're asleep, or, you know, on the other side of the world, then you have a real chance of getting back the one thing that we're just talking about, you know, the other aspects of your life, your family. And you know, that's, I think, for any entrepreneur, that's got to be one of your ultimate goals.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a lesson I sort of like keep teaching my kids, even on a very small scale now. Is like, you know, spend your money on assets that will pay you as well. You know, income generating assets, and then and you're off to the races. Then you have the biggest sort of luxury, which is choice, freedom of choice.
Exactly. And you know, it's interesting you say that. It's one thing I've always thought, that, you know, the old adage, money doesn't buy you happiness, and it doesn't. It really doesn't. But it does give you choices, gives you options.
Yeah, I think it was Theo Paphitis said, "I've been rich and miserable and poor and miserable. Give me rich and miserable every time." So yeah, Dave, thank you very much for your time. You've touched on a couple of things there, which I'd love to come back to. You know, the app and the foundation, as and when they sort of start to develop and evolve. I'd love to have another conversation.
I know you've done your own things and on that sort of foundation-based ideas, and I love some of the things you're doing there as well. So yeah, very, very keen to keep working with you and talking with you on both of those.
That would be awesome. So where can people find you if they want to look up Standard Gas or Dave Whitmarsh?
www.standardgas.com. We'll keep it simple.
Nice and simple. Dave, thank you so much for your time. Pleasure. It's been great.
Always. Have a great weekend, pal.
Yeah, you too.
Take care.
Right. That's the official recording over. Thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
I really enjoyed that. You made it you're very, very good. You really are very good.
Cheers, dude. Thank you. Thank you. I've got to be honest, that was probably your number 6 now, and that was the easiest and the most fun.
Mate, I reckon you're a natural.
I just like talking shit. That helps.
I mean, it helps that we know each other, I suppose.
Well, that does, yeah.
Because at moments there, I forgot that we were actually doing a podcast, but
recording it and stuff.
That's the skill, isn't it? So
I
mean, I know that you will, and I don't mean this in a patronizing way. Genuinely, I think you're very good at that, and I think that's something you should really put some of your time and effort into. I know you are, but mate, take it from me, you're good. I've been interviewed by a lot of people now. That's up there with the best of them.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Yeah, well, it's going to be part of this little ecosystem, the parentpreneur community. So there's
Yeah,
be a membership site and the podcast
yeah,
and all the shit.
yeah,
It's all back to assets. This will be a little digital asset that I can fanny around with and have fun. So,
yeah. No, I agree, mate.
what are you up to for the half term? Are you half terming or are you working through?
Dipping in and out, dipping in
Is it?
and out. You know, I always, when half terms and things like that come around, I always think, right, okay, I'm going to take the week off and we'll do stuff. And then actually, it's not the right thing to do. I'll dip in. I think the kids are going to go up to London to see the David Attenborough, the BBC David
Oh, yeah.
Attenborough. I think it's at Olympia, so we're going to do that. But equally, you know, the kids, yes, they want me around, but they also need to see their mates and you know, doss about. And hopefully the weather's going to be good. I am blessed that the house I'm renting at the moment's got a swimming pool, so I'm hoping that that's going to be cleaned up and opened up so that they can get in there and then doss about, mate, enjoy themselves, be kids, you know.
Just relax. Sounds good.
Yeah.
Good.
And you?
It's the same. So I've just got back from Belgium. I was with Thomas there for 4 days, doing his football tour with the you know, the regional talent center, the academy sort of thing. And that was all right, actually. I got up a wee bit earlier than him, did what I needed to do work wise during the day. When he was like with his mates, I'd do what I had to do in evenings as well. So I'm going to roll that out again. He's got another football tour. We go away to Bari in Italy next Wednesday. So yeah, that's with his grassroots team with Bourne End, the local. Yeah, so they're playing another tournament. So the whole family's going to go out. It's going to be one of those sort of like Euro campy type. We've got a little bungalow on the beach. So,
fantastic! Oh my god!
Yeah, so beaches, Italy, which we love, and yeah, well, I'll still be working. Do you know what? I think the thing is, I enjoy my work. So for me, it's like I don't stop.
That's it. My Grace has got her school options this summer. She's got to make a choice of what she's going to study for GCSE and everything else. And I made the hideous mistake of when I was in the same age. My interests were in history, geography, English literature, you know, in the arts. But Dad was an engineer. He wanted me to do the science, and I ended up doing maths, physics, chemistry, and biology, and I fucking hated it. I hated my chemistry teacher. He hated me. I got a U in my chemistry O level. I think I failed my physics. I think I scraped a whatever in biology. But I learned my lesson. Then do what you enjoy, you know. And my mum told me years later that my history teacher had said that he was personally devastated that I hadn't chosen history because I was a natural historian. Well, don't tell my mum, fucking tell me.
Tell me. Yeah.
Well, no one back then, you know.
You said earlier about, you know, when you had a look around and you saw like mates' dads who were chartered surveyors. It's the same. I think we were kind of probably the last generation. I don't know if we call it, or the last cohort where you looked back over your shoulder for inspiration. You know, oh, I'll be a banker. I'll be a lawyer. Everyone now is much more, no, fuck it, I'm going to go and do media studies and get a degree in David Beckham. So whether that's any better or not, remains to be discussed. But cool. Listen, enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much. I'll give you a shout when I'm next up in town, and I'll grab you a beer or lunch if you're free. So
forward to it. Cheers, pal.
Cheers, mate. Go well. Bye.